To meet the education needs of a new century, the city is using school buildings that go back as far as the 1800s, but the foundation for getting those buildings up to date has been provided by a new master plan. The plan also makes a change for parents concerned about school closings. Our guest is a parent of children in the Boston Public Schools and a member of Quality Education for Every Student, or QUEST. We'd like to welcome Mary Battenfeld. Thank you very much for being with us, Mary.
Thank you for inviting me.
I have to admit that it was only a certain number of months ago, people from QUEST were on our show. They were up in arms because they expected a whole bunch of schools are going to be closed because we just had too much unused capacity. Now it seems that, never mind.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't surprising to us on QUEST or to most parents that this report confirmed that we're not at overcapacity. It was affirming that the mayor had backtracked, I guess you could say, and is admitting now that the problem is not that there are an issue of overcapacity, but an issue of neglect of the school buildings and of the schools in general.
What about the process so far? Because this plan did supposedly involve some community input as well. How do you feel that has been reflected in what we have so far?
Well, it's not a plan yet, so it's a bunch of data that's been released, and that's positive just to have that data out there. QUEST, for example, has been asking for a long time for data on the home-based assignment plan, and we haven't been getting it. So it's good that we have that data that we can look at, and there were several events that parents were invited to. I would have liked to have seen the rollout at someplace other than a $200 a plate luncheon at the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, but other than that, it's so far showed some good community engagement.
I guess one of the things that seems to have happened with this, I keep calling it a plan because you're right, this is not about individual buildings and timetables, but it's a framework maybe more than a plan. And one of the things I saw here is that they were taking at least a more careful look at each and every classroom, the kind of things you need in addition to conventional classrooms as well. Right,
yeah, the report, the McKinsey audit that came up with that grossly inflated figure of 93,000 seats for 56,000 students, basically looked at square footage. So at my daughter's school, Boston Latin Academy, for example, they presumably counted the 2 basement subfloors, which includes a pool that's closed up and hasn't been used for years as part of our capacity. They weren't looking at special ed classrooms, they weren't looking at art classrooms and all that. So it is a very nuanced look, and it also looks at not just space use, but educational facilities and educational uses.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Mary Battenfeld from QUEST. Mary, talk about some of the older buildings, because you're a parent of children in the school system, and they, maybe even more than you, know what it's like to be in an old building that needs some work. So tell me about it.
Right. Yeah, in fact, I think my children have been in what is the oldest building, the old Parkman School. I believe that's the oldest building, and then it was Young Achievers, and now it's the Boston Teachers Union School, and my kids have been at that school. So, and it's certainly being an old building isn't a problem. Being an old building that hasn't been kept up and hasn't had the investments that needed is a problem. And my kids do complain about both lack of space. Boston Arts Academy, they have art supplies in a bathroom because there aren't enough spaces to store it. The air quality, I noticed that Boston Latin Academy was in the red and the deficient, and my daughter complains all the time about how stuffy it is in the classrooms, and of course that makes it hard to learn.
Well, at one time I went to one of these old buildings myself, and one thing I do not really feel very nostalgic about is being in a stuffy classroom and falling asleep because there's just not enough oxygen.
Not what you want, right?
What about getting a building either rebuilt or renovated? You've been involved with was it Boston Arts Academy?
Yes.
And they're in a building that was never originly a school, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it was a post office, I believe, yeah. And it's particularly ill-suited to be an art school. And I have my oldest is a 2014 graduate of Boston Arts Academy, and we have, for a long time tried to get a better space unsuccessfully. It's hard. Particularly when you're doing arts and you don't have a theater.
What advice would you have for the city as far as how to get work on a school done the right way? Because I know some of it's about special expertise about buildings and engineers and so on.
Yeah.
But especially how the parents and the students even can have some input. What should be going on with that?
Right. I mean, I think part of it is remembering that a school is more than a building, it's a community. So one of the reasons that Quest and other parents are vehemently opposed to school closures is because it breaks up the whole community that you're building there. If the Matterhorn School, which actually is being closed, is the families there, just felt that that was their second home. Many of the children there came from backgrounds of trauma, or they were refugees. So to sort of think about, how can we build community in these schools, and how can we make the investments also that in an equitable way, so that schools, across the city, and particularly schools that serve high populations of high needs children, are getting what they need.
What about your advice for parents? Because this is a process that's going to be going on for a while, and I can imagine, sometimes parents have to flex their muscle, get some things prioritized, or make sure that they're done in a certain way.
Yeah, and certainly I think the whole fact that this report is coming out, that it's repudiating the McKinsey audit, that it's a real investment in $1 billion, that's a lot, and that's exciting, is because parents have been pushing for more investments in our traditional public schools, and students as well. I mean, I think the students who led the student walkout are part of the reason we're at this place where we're now looking with excitement toward real investments in Boston public schools.
Thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Mary Battenfeld from
Thank you.
Quest.